We're starting. Good morning, everyone. This is the official time. We've started to record already on this. What I'm starting the shiur today is a little bit differently, and that is with an overview of this parak that was prepared by Rav Yoel bin Nun. For those of you who love learning Tanakh, which I'm sure is all of us, Rav Yoel bin Nun is one of the best Israeli educators, not only of Tanakh, but across the board. He is from the first Machzor of Yeshivat Har Etzion. He once spoke here at Kins many years ago. He doesn't speak any English, but he was able to speak in an Ivrit Kala, in a relatively easy Hebrew. And he really brings to the fore a tremendous knowledge and understanding, not just of the text, but also of literature in general. And so he's able to look at the text in ways that sometimes we miss it. On the website 929, which is the website that deals with a daily chapter of Tanakh, Rav Yoel bin Nun generally has a brief paragraph or a little bit more sometimes on that chapter in Tanakh. And on this chapter, and if you notice at the top of the page, and hopefully everyone got the pages that were being handed out here, and also hopefully everyone sees them on screen, in 2018, which was the last time that 929 had this, Rav bin Nun wrote the following overview of this chapter of Perek Daled. And the way he did it, and I'll let you read it on your own in more detail, but he wrote that there were 10 points to the Perek, 10 pieces of the Perek, which is pretty good given that there are only 17 sentences in the whole Perek. The first is that we need to understand that in the rebuilding of the walls of Yerushalayim, we talked about where the walls were being rebuilt, that Nehemiah is a prayerful person. And that's a point number one. He prays, but at the very same time as him praying, he also takes action. So he's not relying exclusively on the prayer. He's also dealing at the very same time with putting up guards. And that we'll see in detail inside the Psukim. Number two, there is a point where there is an expression of hopelessness from the Jews, Yeush in his terminology, and this hopelessness could have gotten the better of them, but fortunately, he was able to motivate them to move forward. The third, which is part of the reason for the hopelessness, is that enemies were organizing all around. The Jews were completely surrounded, and being completely surrounded, they were preparing for a surprise attack. The fourth, that Ezra was able to receive information from behind enemy lines. And the way he was able to receive it is because where the enemy was, whether in the north, the east, the west, or the south, there were Jews who lived among them. It wasn't completely segregated. And as a result, those Jews were able to report information back to Ezra. Interestingly, we will see in the text that we're not 100% sure what the goal of that report was. Was it to provide the intelligence, or was it to say, don't even try defending yourselves, there's no hope? The fifth was that Ezra, the way Ezra prepared the defenses, he prepared people who were shielded by the walls that had been built up and by rocks that were sticking out, and they continued to work. It was half work and half defense. Then the next point number 6, that he reminds them to trust in God. Ezra is the ultimate cheerleader. He is a great motivational speaker to them. The enemy discovers that the Jews, to their surprise, are going to defend themselves, and they retreat. 8 is that they continue building, and while they're building, they're carrying weapons with them. We'll see that in a minute. That they're holding work implements, and at the very same time they're holding their weapons. The 9th, is that Ezra is also the military leader, that he'll blow a shofar and tell them to assemble in specific places where they need to have additional defense. And then finally, we see that the guarding is taking place day and night. So those are all of the pieces. what he points out, what Yoel Ben Nun also points out, besides giving this as a general introduction to the parak, he says that if you look in the second to the last paragraph where I bolded the words, "Manyen ma'od sheNechemia yitpalel tamid." It's very interesting that Nehemiah is always praying. Limed et hayudim litpalel ule'echoz b'neshek, and he taught the Jews how to pray and to hold on to their weapons, without any kind of contradiction between working and learning. The Raklif de Hamelech Artaxashta, who in Mich called, and it was only when we used before the king Artaxerxes was his voice low. Amar Shumavakesh Raklif noted Ir Kivrot Avotai, and he acted as the humble servant, saying, "I just want to go back and build my ancestral burial places to rebuild that city." In other words, Ezra is a model for many of this idea of defense and learning together. And now you can also understand some of the pictures I sent along. I'll bring some of them up just very quickly. There's a couple of posters and another famous memorial. The posters, just to get into them, let's start with the first poster. We'll do historically in order. Okay, this first poster, I hope you can see it. Okay, it is the one. Okay, excuse me a moment. It is this one. Okay. This poster is for Chaf Tammuz Tafresh Tzadi Chet. So Tzadi Chet is 1938. They quote from our parak, Bachat Yado Osebim Lacha. With one hand he's doing work, Va'achat Mechazeket HaShalach, and the other is holding his weapon. And if you look in this, you'll see there's a man building a wall. He has a trowel in his hand, and he also has a sword in his other hand. This was a poster that was put out on Herzl's Yortzeit in 1938. And they used the imagery of this chapter of the building with the strength. If you look, on the other hand, if you look at 1958, again, they take the same imagery, the posuk again from our parak, Habonim b'choma v'hanosim b'sevel umasim v'achat yado osem b'mlacha v'achat mechazeket hashalach. The exact same pasuk again they use, and if you notice, you have the farmer, you have the builder, and you have the soldier all together. And this was a poster in honor of 1958. In the 50s also, and this is the last picture just to give you the same thing, at the memorial of the Kibbutz Negba, that's this picture, which is a real photograph, the memorial of Kibbutz Negba, Natan Rappaport. Natan Rappaport was a very famous sculptor. He was the sculptor in Warsaw of the Warsaw Ghetto Memorial. He is also the sculptor whose bas relief is on the wall of Yad Vashem, which is a very similar to the Warsaw Ghetto Memorial, but there's a couple of significant changes he made, taking into account that this is being done in Medinat Yisrael. It's an interesting, if you ever want to get pictures of both and try to see how he changed it, it's fascinating. He made some changes, but he also did this memorial at Kibbutz Negba. Kibbutz Negba was overthrown in 1948. This memorial is still there. Negba is not far from Kiryat Gat, and Rappaport is definitely a sculptor in a Soviet style. But if you notice, you have the farmers and you have the person with the gun at the side. And in some scholarly articles that really have looked at Rappaport's sculpture, you notice they say right away it's the Nehemiah concept of the working and the fighting together. And Elaine is right. There's a woman. She is the one. Okay. Yeah. Then next to her is another chalutz, and the next to him, by the way, is a person defending. But if you notice, one of the other pieces about Rappaport is Rappaport was also being somewhat realistic in that, because the defender is not in military garb. He's in civilian garb, because the Palmach, when they were fighting, and the Haganah and the Etzel, when they were fighting, they did not have uniforms. And so they were in civilian garb, but this idea of the combining of both, that we find in modern imagery. And the last word on this, and then we'll get into the psukim, the part of the reason of it is because the Chalutzim viewed themselves very similar to Ezra Nehemiah. It was a Shivat Zion. It was a rebuilding of Zion. It was a return of the exiles. And they found this idea of how Nehemiah was able to withstand the enemies that surrounded him, some of whom said, oh, we love you so much, we want you to stop doing what we need you to do. And they found that imagery to be something that was very reminiscent of the experience they were having. Yeah, Leah.
I think that was not in the early years of the state.
There was an awareness, right? Yeah. What Leah's pointing out is it speaks to Tanakh in the early years of the state. People in the early years of the state were very well educated in terms of Tanakh. Ben Gurion had his weekly chug, a weekly conversation that took place about Tanakh, where he invited some of the leading thinkers and scholars to this chug. They published books about their thoughts and their conversations regarding all of this, the Tanakh. And so Tanakh played a very, very significant role. We are dealing, in the early Chalutzim, many of them obviously came from observant homes. And those early Chalutzim, when they came, they had that appreciation for the historical moment that they were living. A historical moment that they saw was a reflection of what Ezra and Nehemiah had done as well. We're ready to get into the parak now. With all of that introduction, you see the 10 points. You see this combination that we're going to have of working and of defending. And now you'll see how it plays out in our parak. Pasuk Aleph. Vayhi kasher shama Sanballat v'Tovia v'Aravim v'Amonim v'Ashdodim. And it was when they heard. Now, who are they? They are the enemies of the Jews. We're dealing with Sanballat. We know about, that's the north. Tovia is south. Geshem, we know about, he was the Arav. We also know Ashdodim. In other words, we've now surrounded the Jews on all sides possible. Obviously, the Mediterranean Sea, there's a little bit of an opening, but Ashdod is also possibly closing it off. When they heard Ki altaru lechomot Yerushalayim, that, as Rashi says, Nehemiah has rebuilt or is rebuilding, probably a better word is repairing, the walls of Yerushalayim. Now, interestingly, the Mitzudat Sion points out that this Ki alta arucha lechomot Yerushalayim, that arucha is inyan refuah, is healed. And in fact, the Dat Mikra points out that arucha is actually like a scab. That what it means is that it's begun to heal. The scab has formed, closing off the wound of what had happened to the walls. Because Rashi says that the people who were exposed, the prutzim, began to close off. The Ralbag says it's referring to the places that the sections of the wall that had been open were now being closed. Vayichar lahemod, and it angered them tremendously. Now, there are all sorts of theories as to why it angered them. According to Chazal, the reason it angered them goes back to the earliest time after Cyrus, when Zerubbabel came to Eretz Yisrael and wanted to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash, and they wanted to help, and they were rejected because we did not view them as legitimate members of Klal Yisrael. And so we're building a Beit HaMikdash. We want to make sure that the people who are building them are from us. However, there's also other pieces. There's also a political piece to this as well when you look within the historians. And the historians say that Sanballat was the first of the governors who was appointed in this region. There was the Pacha Ever Nahar, which we know about, had the broader region that encompassed Transjordan and Syria and Eretz Yisrael as well. And yet, in the Shomron, Sanballat was the first who had power. And all of a sudden, he sees now Nehemiah showing up, and Nehemiah has the power of a Pacha as well, of a governor over Yehudah, taking over a piece of what he may have considered his rightful rule. And on top of it, to make things even worse, Sanballat, while he was loyal to the Persian governor, was more indigenous to the area. He had come a generation, 2 generations ago. They had come, and Sanballat was from there. Nehemiah is coming to Eretz Yisrael from the inner circle of Artaxerxes. He had been a very high-placed official in Persia. And as a result, he had the king's ear. And by having the king's ear, it's very complicated for how they're going to depose him. They really can't do it in an open fashion, which we'll see in just a minute. Yeah.
At this point in time, do people in general have access to the Nevi'im? Because the non-Jews could have read Sefer Yeshayahu, where there were references to
Well,
that
so if you remember, so it's fascinating, and I was just reading a little bit more about it last night. The Samaritans, Sanballat is a Samaritan, okay? The Samaritans had access to Tanakh, but they had rewritten Tanakh. And after their rejection, they had rewritten, first of all, they had a book called the Book of Joshua, which was different than our Sefer Yoshua. And so places where they viewed, where we talk about Yerushalayim, they talk about Har Grizim, Mount Grizim. And Mount Grizim is right outside of Nablus. Okay, it's the 2 mountains outside of Nablus. One is Grizim and one is Eval, right? And so what happened is, even if they had access to it, they viewed us as illegitimate in following what they referred to as Torah, as the Torah Musa, as Moshe, as the Torah Moshe. Well, it is different because when we rejected them, they rejected us, and the way they rejected us was actually rewriting. Okay, and if you look in the book of Joshua, their book of Joshua, it shows that they had reconfigured all sorts of things. We were the ones. They were the ones who were the legitimate, who were supposed to build the temple on Har Grizim. We came in and we had convinced the emperor, the king, of a false narrative. It's a fascinating piece. So whether they had access to the Nevi'im, but the Nevi'im for them pointed to different things than what it pointed to for us. Vayiksheru chulam yachdav. So these different enemies all came together. Vayilavo lilachem b'Yerushalayim, and their goal was to go ahead and to battle Yerushalayim, to stop the rebuilding. V'lasot lo to'ah, and to create this mass confusion. Now, why are they creating this mass confusion? Well, very simply, that they were afraid, says the Malbim, to go in a direct war. They wanted to have some kind of guerrilla warfare, because a direct war they felt would be a problem because the Jews already had some defenses. They wanted to find what was the best. And I would also suggest that it might also be, if they had an outright war, they're defying the command of Artaxerxes. So if they can do some kind of guerrilla warfare, they have some plausible deniability for what they want to accomplish. Okay, or as the Ralbag points out, there may have been too many Jews. The Jews were concentrated right now in Yerushalayim. Now, we talked about the estimates, maybe 1,500 Jews, there may have been more, but the concentration of the Jews, Yerushalayim and Ir David is on top of a mountain. Okay, for them to do an outright attack, the Malbim suggests wasn't what they wanted to do, and the Ralbag says they may have been outnumbered. And I throw in that it was also politically very risky to do such an outright attack. Vanit palel el Elokeinu. And at that point, we prayed to our God. Now remember, one of the things that we see about Nehemiah is he's a prayerful individual. V'na'amid mishmar alehem yomam v'layla mipnehem. And we also put up a guard day and night to protect us from them. This is a very, very important step Nehemiah does. He doesn't do one or the other. He does both together. He's that personality who is able to combine, as Yoel Ben Nun talked about, and obviously Yoel Ben Nun is referring to an idea of a Hesder kind of environment where you fight and you learn. It's not an either or kind of situation. And Nehemiah did the same thing in rebuilding Yerushalayim. You had to do both. Vayomer Yehuda And yet the people, Rashi says, from Yehuda, and the Dat Mikra points out, those are the majority of the workers, the people of the tribe of Yehuda, they're saying to themselves, Kashal koach hasabal. They're bemoaning the fact that the builders, the people who are schlepping the building materials, they're weakened. And there's still a lot of rubble to remove. And they say, we aren't going to be able to do this. This is their point of absolute yeush, where they just feel that they've lost the opportunity. Now, it is obviously, if Nehemiah can't get ahead of this, they're going to be in a very big problem. Vayomru tsarenu, and at the very same time, our enemies said, Lo yed'u v'lo yir'u ad asher navo b'tocham v'haragum. The Jews are not going to be able to know. In other words, we're planning a surprise attack against the Jewish people. This surprise attack will catch them. We will kill them. V'ishbatnu et hamelacha. And we're going to stop the battle. Now, what's fascinating from the Pasuk, if you notice, what's their goal? Their goal is not to defeat the Jews. The goal is not to chase the Jews out. The goal is just to stop the rebuilding of Yerushalayim. If they have to do it by killing everyone, they'll kill everyone. But they got to stop the rebuilding of Yerushalayim. This is for them a terrible possibility. And now, when the Jews who were living among the non-Jews, Rashi says this clearly, okay, they were living among the non-Jews, they were living among Sanballat and all of the rest of these people, Vayomru lanu, and they said to us, now I'm going to take a simple explanation that the Jews are the ones who are reporting this, Vayomru lanu, eser pamim, 10 times. Okay, Rashi takes this approach. The Jews who were living among the non-Jews came to us and they warned us 10 times. Mikol hamikomot asher tashuvu aleinu, from all of the places where we are living among. Now that's not a real good direct translation. Barry is sitting there with an art scroll, and so some of you have the art scroll translation. He always follows Rashi. How does Rashi translate the pasuk? Pasuk Vav 6.
And the Jews who lived among them came and warned us 10 times. Gathered together from all the places against them.
Gathered together against all the places, from all the places to which you return, they will come against us. So notice, where does it say gather together in the Hebrew? It says mikol hamikomot, from all of the places. Now, there's a missing verb. Rashi is taking the places and he says, gather together, come together, and you'll come and help out Yerushalayim. That's what they're saying. You know, we need reinforcements. They're warning us and warning us and warning us. However, and the Malbim takes a very similar approach to that. However, there is another way of explaining it. And the other way of explaining this pasuk is, when the Jews came, the Jews who were living among the non-Jews, they said, Vayomru, they reported that the non-Jews said, Lanu eser pamim, we have 10 times mikol hamikomot asher tashuvu aleinu. We have 10 times the forces against anybody who's going to come and try to fight against us. So it's a very different way of looking at it. This is one of the suggestions of the Dat Mikra of how to look at this, okay? And against some of the normal way of Chazal, but it does deal with that missing verb, where gather, where we don't see gather. So he says, one way or the other, there is this warning that is coming. Now, the warning might be, this is what you need to do. That's Rashi and the Malbim. The other warning, the warning could be, this is what they are saying. We're giving you a heads up. They're saying there is no chance. They have 10 times the armies against you. Ve'amid, and so at that point, Nehemiah reports, he goes back into the first person. Ve'amid mitachtiot lemakom me'achrei lechoma bat tzchichim. And he goes ahead and he sets up people hiding behind to defend behind the outcroppings of the rocks. Ve'amid et ha'am lamishpachot. And I organized the people by families. Im charvotehem ramachehem v'kashtotehem, with their swords, their spears, and their bows and arrows, and their bows. So why is he arranging them by family? We've seen before, if you remember in the previous parak, when we were talking about rebuilding the walls, sometimes he took advantage of the fact that he had people who lived opposite a broken portion of the wall that they were responsible to build it. They had a personal interest in this. Here, he's arranging them by families because if he tries to rearrange in a new kind of army, you don't have that kind of loyalty, the immediate loyalty that you'll have if it's all by family groupings. It's entirely possible, by the way, that some of the people explain this. I saw this explicitly in the New Koren piece on this, that from Dov Zakheim, that if you look at it, it could have been also as men, women, and children. It could have been just like, if you can imagine, during the 47, 48, 49, when during the founding of the state of Israel, everyone had to help out. Everyone had to be part of it. I remember from my Rosh Hashiva of Hirschler Zatzal, he told me, or his Rebbitzin, the Rebbitzin told me that during 1948, he was responsible for the secret cache of arms, the slick, okay, and she was responsible for the evacuations. And so she would take everybody out with the buggies and everything, and they lived in Sanhedria, and she would take them, she would be in the evacuations, he was in charge of defense, he had men and women fighting because it was a time of crisis. And that also might be implied by the mishpachot, not necessarily, because many times in Tanakh, when we talk about mishpachot, it's just the family groupings, but it doesn't have to be women also participating in the battle, but it could be. Ve'erem va'akum, and I saw and I rose up. Now, what did he see? Rashi says, I saw the enemy coming. Whereas I saw this happening. I saw what happens. Va'omar el achorim ve'el askanim ve'el yeter am. And I made the proclamation to the elite and to the rest of the people. Al tiru mitnehem. Don't be afraid from them. Et Hashem hagadol v'hanora zachoru. Remember the great and awesome God, and defend your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Ezra and Nehemiah make sure this is a personal battle. This is not a battle, let's fight for some big idea. He doesn't say, let's defend the Beit HaMikdash. He says, defend your families. When you tell someone to defend their families, it is a stronger plea than anything else. Okay, when the enemy heard that we were aware that they were coming to fight us, the Malbim says, when the enemy heard that we knew they were coming to fight us, and we were all ready for them, God undid their plan. And everybody went back to building. And went back to the walls. And from that day forward, okay, half of my Narim, Nehemiah had his own elite guard. Half of them were doing work. Now, it's interesting. Why does Nehemiah have half of that group doing work? Okay, it could be very simply because he wants to be part of this. He doesn't want to be the elite. So why doesn't he have everyone? Because he needs people to be protecting. He needs the guards. So he gives as many as he possibly can, Malbim, gives as many as he possibly can to fight and to build at the same time. And they're coming. They have their spears, they have their shields, they have their bows, they have their armor. V'asarim acharei kol Beit Yisrael. And the leadership after all of the rest of the Jewish people. Yehuda, not Beit Yisrael, Beit Yehuda. Habonim b'choma v'anosim b'sevel omsim b'achat yada oseh b'mlacha v'achat mechazeket hashalach. Here's this pasuk that was used in the imagery. The people, Sefer B'Safra, right? And here, the builders of the Choma and those who are the porters who are carrying the materials, in one hand they're doing the work, in one hand they're holding their weapons. The shalach is the neshek itself. Huh?
In one case, it says half the people were A.
His guards.
Well, but now it says they're all AB.
So, no, you have the elite guards. The elite guards are working. And the elite guards, there's a group of them who are defined by really being just primarily the military. And then all of the rest of the people who are going out, they also have to be prepared for attack. So they have these two things. It's that image of the guy putting up the bricks and holding the sword. It is this combination of the two. V'abonim ish charbo asurim al motnav uvonim v'atokea b'shofar etzli. And the builders here, now they have, if you notice, their sword is in the sheath. Why? Because to build really well, you need two hands. You can't be holding on to the sword at the same time. So they're going ahead and they're holding on, they're doing their work, but they have their weapons right by their side. And Nehemiah says, the bugler, the one with the shofar, he's with me. One more time, Nehemiah gets them all together, and he tells both the elite and the common, the work we have before us is great, and it is urechava according to Mitzudat David. It is in many places still. V'anachnu nifradim ala choma. And we, are separated. We're in smaller groups. We have to be able to work in all these different places. Now, this entire rebuilding of the wall, we'll see in Perek Vav, is a 52-day endeavor. They work very quickly, night and day. And so he says, listen, the way we're doing it, we're not in one big group defending together. People, unfortunately, are separated one from the other. And therefore he says, if you hear, or when you hear, in the place when you hear the shofar, shama tikavtsu elenu, then gather. In other words, we have to have some, if we're being attacked, we need everyone to show up. Elokenu yilachem lanu. But also understand, this comes back to the religious aspect of it, God will fight for us in that way. As Rashi says, Lanu is ba'adenu, lema'anenu, on our behalf. V'anachnu osim b'mlacha, we're doing the work. V'chetziam machzikim b'ramachim, ma'alot hashachar et tzeit ha'kochavim. And some of them are holding on to their spears from dawn until tzeit ha'kochavim, until the stars come out. Gam ba'etehim artil am. I also told the people at that time, Ish v'na'aro yalinu b'toch Yerushalayim. Everyone stays in Yerushalayim. V'ayu lanu halayla mishmar v'hayom melacha. At night we had a guard, and during the day we were able to do our work. Before the time when you could do work, with electricity. Ve'ein ani ve'achai u'na'arai v'anshei ha'mishmar asher acharai. And I am me, and I, and my brethren, and my servants, and the people who are guarding, following me, and anachnu poshtim begadenu. We're never off duty. We're never going to take off of our clothes. Ish shilcho hamayim. Ultimately, each person is going to have to go ahead and bring to themselves. The only thing they ever had to do is if they had to drink, if they had to take care of something, they took care of it. But they were constantly on guard. Now, what's interesting in the Pasuk Tet Zion, the second to the last, the penultimate Pasuk of this parak, we talk about Vayulanu alayla mishmar vayom melacha. Okay, that Yavetz, okay, says very clearly in his history that Nehemiah had all of his people working because he wanted to show that no one was exempt from the working. That was necessary. Again, we talked about it was half and half, but Yavetz points out that why is so significant because not only did it have to get done, he wanted to show how important this task was. No one was above it. The Gemara in Brachos, though, quotes this pasuk. And in quoting this pasuk, Vayulanu halayla mishmar vayom melacham, okay, and the previous pasuk as well, where we say me'alot hashachar ad tzeit kochavim, when we want to define what the length of a Jewish day is. Me'alot hashachar ad tzeit kochavim, and this on daf bet amud bet in Masechet Brachot, it says when you start saying Kriyat Shema at night, when you have Marv. And so they say the time you start saying Marav, say the Chachamim, from when the Kohanim were able to eat their Truma. And when is that? They say it's from Tzeit HaKochavim. And they say, how do you know Tzeit HaKochavim when the stars come out as the beginning of the night? Well, because they said we don't have proof for it, but we have a pretty good thing to rely on, as we have a siman. And the siman is we know that they worked all day and at night they guarded. And we know from the pasuk beforehand, it says very clearly, Me'alot hashachar ad tzeit kochavim. That's their definition of day. Tzeit kochavim is the beginning of night, and that's the time when you should be able to start saying Shema. Which is why, for instance, on Friday night when we daven at the normal times we daven, even when whether it's an early minyan or we daven at a regular minyan on Friday night, you come back, or even during the week, we daven right after Shkia, right after sunset. When the stars come out 50 minutes after sunset, 40 minutes, 50 minutes after sunset, people should once again say the Kriyat Shema, so it's after the Tzeit HaKochavim. So this parak has two significances. One is its significance in terms of modern Jewish history, the imagery of Nehemiah being the person who combined warfare, prayer, Torah, and also there's a significance, just a halachic one, that it helps us learn when is the right time to say Kriyat Shema. We're going to stop right here. It's a little early, but so did the rain stop right now. And so we can leave again. Who knows when it'll start up again. For those of you who stayed home, I'm glad you're dry. We'll find another opportunity to see each other. Hopefully everyone will make it in person next week. Same time, same place, Parak Hay. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much.